Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Act 2 podcast. This is Josh. We're reposting an episode this week because Tasha is traveling. She's doing some press. She's going all around the world. And so we thought we'd do a repost this week. However, because we've entered Tomb Raider month, I thought this would be a good time for everyone to send in any questions they might have about Tomb Raider, because our future episodes, we're going to address the questions and we're going to talk about your process, everything that went into Tomb Raider, the craft, everything. So if you have a Tomb Raider question for Tasha, now is the time. Can you please talk, Tasha?
Mad doggy over here. Yeah, send in your questions. We're going to talk about Tomb Raider. We're going to break down the craft. Watch it on Netflix. It starts on October 10th. And then you can send in questions about specific episodes that you're watching, about specific moments. How did that come to be? What's the story behind it? We'll talk about those things. And then also leading up to the release of Tomb Raider on October 10th. If there's anything that you want to know going into it before you watch it, just big questions you have out there, writers, send them in. Craft questions, process questions, all of the things. We will get into it. You can send them at act2writers@gmail.com.
Could have just done that at the top.
But this week we have a repost of an episode. In the meantime, enjoy. Welcome back to the Act 2 podcast, a podcast for the real-life working screenwriter. I'm Tasha Hugh.
And I am Josh Hallman.
And as a reminder, Act 2 is a network and support group for the everyday working screenwriter, of which this podcast is just one of the things we do. Thank you for joining us here. And thank you to all of you who subscribe to the podcast and who give us feedback. We love it. We appreciate it. We need it. If you'd like to DM us with questions, topic suggestions, or feedback, or if you just want to say hi, you can reach out to us at act2writers@gmail.com, which is all spelled out, or on our Instagram and Twitter at Act2Writers. I'm on the things, Story Thursday on Instagram and Twitter at Tasha 3.0.
And I am Joshua Hallman on Twitter, Josh Hallman on Instagram.
And today we are talking about a writing craft thing. We're getting back to the craft. Mm-hmm. And Screencraft always posts these interesting lists. It's like the BuzzFeed for screenwriting.
I'm sure that's exactly what Screencraft thinks it's doing.
And they posted this thing, which was kind of interesting, about 8-sequence structure. And the basic idea is you have a 120-minute movie that can be broken down into 8 sequences of roughly 12 to 15 minutes each, which there was an interesting little factoid at the top of this list, because according to Screencraft, and I've done no research of my own on this at all, but according to Screencraft, they said that back in the days when we had film reels, and the film reels needed to be changed in the movie theater, it would take a few moments to change those, and so screenwriters would need to write to these kind of cliffhangers so that the audience wouldn't just leave the theater because they're bored. So it's basically like a commercial break within actual theatrical released movies. So they kind of had to think about this 8-sequence structure, and that's where it all started. So that's a cool origin story if that is true, and that is the intro I have today.
No, that's a great intro. I saw this article, and I actually found it pretty interesting because we've talked about structure. We always talk about structure. Whenever I see somebody's outline or someone else's structure, I'm just really interested in it. I came across, and I think I sent it to you, the very light outline for The World's End, which was an Edgar Wright film, and it was on side.
I don't remember you sending this to me.
I did. We were like, we're going to talk about it on the podcast. And I was like, Tasha, have you seen The World's End? And then you said, Paul wants me to see it. And then we had like a 10-minute conversation that was very memorable for all of us. And, but it was broken. The way, you know what? I'm gonna post this. What I'm talking about right now, I'm gonna post this on our Twitter feed because it's so interesting. It breaks down The World's End, and I'm just really interested in when structure breaks things down into little segments, and everyone tries to simplify this shit because it's really complicated.
Yeah, I remember it now. You sent a picture of it. It was like it was a whiteboard.
Yeah,
which was. Yeah.
You're making shit up right now. I'm so happy because you used to just tell the truth, and now you've come to the dark side. You just lie on the fly.
I don't have time for the truth anymore. Lie.
Yeah, the truth is whatever you want it to be. So anyway, structure. And it's just a crazy
Structure.
thing. People ask about it, right? Because whenever I have
Yeah.
like, let me just on like the very like base level of this, the way I always look at structure is obviously you have Act 1, you have Act 2, and you have Act 3. But in Act 2, you have like Act 2A and Act 2B.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's just how I look at structure.
But now it's Act 2 A.1, Act 2 A.2, Act 2 B.1, Act 2 B.2, which is what we'll talk about today. And I struggle with this a lot, like story structure. And you and I have talked about this on the podcast and our own. We're like, I feel like neither of us are proponents of structural rules. We hate rules. I feel like outside of writing, I'm a rule follower. Inside of writing, I'm a huge rebel.
Oh, yeah.
I don't like it because I remember young Tasha would take all of these, when I'm trying to figure out how to even write a screenplay to begin with and how to write one that works for the market, like all the things you start to think about as you're learning how to write screenplays. I would read all these structure books. It would be overwhelming because when they talk about structure in these books and on these lists and stuff, they make it sound like you have to write your movie and your story to that structure, like meaning the structural beats are how you get your ideas, is how it always read to me. Because they would like break down Indiana Jones and make it seem like Indiana Jones is beated out this way because they wanted to write a movie with this kind of structure versus just having the idea of Indiana Jones. And I don't know if that makes sense, but I've had to learn to reverse that, where it's like I come up with my story first. I come up with what I want to tell and maybe even how it ends and some of the main turning points. I have that already in my head.
Yeah.
And then when I sit down to figure out, okay, how do I make this cool idea into a movie? That's when I start looking at some of these templates, these structure templates, to be like, okay, that's right. I need my midpoint at, around middle of the movie, around that 50-minute mark. Okay, how do I get to that? Well, I need, a turning point to get into Act 2. And it's just like it's starting to layer in those beats, but only after I've come up with my story first. So like, I guess that's my sort of caveat to this whole structure conversation we're about to have.
No, totally. And I really feel like, especially in a first draft, unless you have a very extensive outline that is to the point, in a first draft, a lot of times you just want to write. And that's like 150 pages of whatever your story is, and that could be trimmed down later to 90 pages or 100 pages or 110 or whatever it is. So a lot of times I find myself not even following any structure. It's just like getting moments down.
Well, I think once you get into it, by the way, like you start to learn, like structure becomes sort of innate, and you know where you need all the stuff, and you stop needing to look at these templates.
You're just like, all right, listen, nothing's happened. No one cares about these characters anymore. Something has to happen.
Yeah, you can feel it if there's a bunch of dead space. But also, if you find you've written your 150-page vomit draft and you're like, oh, there's so much dead space, that's also a time, I think, to come back to something like this 8-sequence story structure we're about to talk about and be like, oh, okay, that's right. Like every 15 pages, I don't have something interesting happening that's a turning point. So maybe I need to rethink how my characters get from point A to point B now. Yeah. So they can be ways to like tighten story that you have as well. I think Josh and I would just caution using structure as your very first stepping stone to coming up with your ideas.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. Let's get into it.
Should we fucking get into this?
Yeah.
Okay. 8 sequence structure. You want me to dive in? Am I doing this?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, you know what? Let me just shout out this author real quickly. Britton Perelman. Britton. Can I read? I'm Ron Burgundy. This is on Screencraft. I feel like we have to, give a shout out. All right.
Absolutely.
The 8 sequence structure, as broken down here, is Act 1 is made up of sequence 1 and 2. Act 2 is sequence 3, 4, 5, and 6. Act 3 is sequence 7 and 8. And the way that they have this is in sequence 1, it's your introductions, which is pretty cut and dry. It's introducing us to the world, our characters, a sense of what this movie is. It's the intro. And according to this, it ends with the inciting incident.
And it also says that it hints at upcoming conflicts and tension, and you learn the basic premise of the story. I think this is super important because I know I am a fan of the slow burn. I get caught in my own way when it comes to the slow burn, and I've read plenty of scripts that this first sequence, this first 12 to 15 page moment of your screenplay is real slow. And it's maybe just a character walking through their day, and it's not setting up that the question of the movie or the conflicts that are to come, or even like hinting if like there's plenty of scripts I've read that where it's actually a horror movie, but you don't know that in the first 15 pages. And that doesn't mean like you have to have a scare in the first 15 pages, but the tone is just not there. And it actually like starts as a family comedy and then turns into a horror. You're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
And that just creates confusion. So when you first intro your movie in that first kind of, if you think of them as like mini movies, right? These 12 to 15 minute mini movies, that's the first intro to your entire world. So what do you want to say with it? I think that's just an important way of looking at it.
Yeah. And I'm just going to echo something you said, why this is like such an interesting thing is I love the idea of mini movies, and I love the idea of writing something that ends with a cliffhanger. And in this case, it's like, if I could master that, like, which is something I always try to do, is writing where it's so engaging. It's always ending with a cliffhanger where you just want to keep going. And I feel like that's what this is trying to do.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it's trying to do. And it's such a smart way of telling a story. Mm-hmm. And that's not that you should fabricate these hooks, but if that feels organic to your storytelling, and it's something that you can go back and do, by the way, like we were talking about. If you've written the draft you love and you can go back and be like, okay, at my page 15 or at where my first sequence ends in my movie, is there something exciting that happens that makes the audience want to continue to read or to continue to watch if this was actually made? Those are just really important questions to ask yourself. I can feel like a voice in my head being like, you're selling out because you're trying to do hooks. And like, that's not what it is. It's just trying to write an engaging story. So if this helps you do that, which it helps me do that, then I think this is great.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm continually trying to justify why we're talking about this
totally.
topic.
Me too. Why is that? Why? Yeah. All right.
I don't know. Because we hate structure.
All
right. Sequence 2 is the dilemma. So after your introduction, you're talking, your 12 to 15 minute movie now is their dilemma. So after the inciting incident, there's usually a period of time in which the protagonist considers the call to action, where they debate whether or not to leave their familiar, comfortable world and proceed into the unknown. That's what happens in this sequence, though, of course, it will look different in every story. So by the end of sequence 2, the protagonist is on the journey that will take them to the end of the movie, and there's no turning back. That's quote unquote from Screencraft.
Yeah.
But I love the last bit, that the protagonist is on the journey that will take them to the end of the movie, and there is no turning back.
Mm-hmm.
That's your break into Act 2 when we talk about the call to action. I hate that term because it doesn't make sense. Like I hate it. Like that shuts my brain down. When we start using terms like that shuts my brain down, and it makes me feel like I'm writing really formulaic. But if you tell me I need at the end of this section for my protagonist to now have, their entire status quo world turned upside down, so there's no turning back, that I understand.
You know what? I think I know why we're just justifying everything here. We're working through our own issues. Is because this is like, it moves into like Save the Cat territory, which great, fine book. I love it. I love all the screenwriting books, and it's weird because there are no rules to screenwriting aside from just make or tell an engaging story that makes people turn the fucking pages of the script, or swiping if you're reading on an iPad probably. And I feel like we're now advocating for rules, which is weird, but we're not. So we're justifying why we're not. We're just saying
that's it.
Okay.
Yeah, this is therapy. Clearly this is hitting on one of our issues.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Okay. Sequence number 3. The first obstacle. Now, by this point, we are starting Act 2. The protagonist has officially entered the new world. And during sequence number 3, the protagonist faces their first real obstacle. New tensions and conflicts arise, and stakes are raised. So we're in it. There's no turning back. We're in it, and the new world is upon us. That's number 3. Sequence 3, I mean.
Yeah, I also call this the fun of the premise. So once we've broken out of Act 1, we're at the first obstacle. I think it's helpful to think of it as a first obstacle because, your character's entering this new world that you're putting them in, whether it's literally, you're going to Neverland, or it's just I've joined the police force and I'm now on the beat. And I know nothing about causes and terminology. On the beat.
Yeah,
okay.
No, that's really good.
So like that, those are equally new worlds. So what is the first obstacle there? Because if I'm watching a movie, I want conflict, right? I want my character who is not a cop and is now a cop to have to face some new, life thing. Like, it's different now to be a cop, and maybe there's prejudice, or maybe there's crime that's okay, I should really stop at the world I don't know anything about.
Yeah, no, keep going. This is amazing.
Just watching me implode.
I'm just sipping my water.
Point is, it should be new tension, new conflict, and an attempt for your character to solve new problems in this world. They either fail or they succeed, but there's something engaging going on here. That's why we're calling it a first obstacle, and I think that makes sense.
Yes.
Anyway, sequence 4. Some might call sequence 4 the fun and games of the movie. I would not, because I call sequence 3 fun and games of the movie. In sequence 4, the protagonist faces another obstacle or dilemma that comes as a direct result of what happened in sequence 3. This sequence usually ends with a midpoint. Okay, so this list is starting to piss me off a little bit.
I got to tell you something, Tasha.
Yeah.
This is like a midpoint twist that I'm giving you in this podcast.
Oh, shit.
This is starting to make sense to me.
No!
I'm like, you know what? Yeah. I get it. I understand.
This is, again, where I would write my screenplay first and see if I can't make my script better and tighter and more exciting by referring to this rather than writing to it. I don't know how to write to the protagonist faces another obstacle or dilemma that comes as a direct result of what happened in sequence 3. That feels like I'm suddenly fabricating an obstacle to get to this midpoint, and I hate that feeling. Instead, it's like, as a writer, you want to be like, what is your character feeling? Who are they right now? What do they want? And how does what they want get them into trouble or, propel the story forward? And then I'll go, okay, now that I've written this story of my character being propelled forward by their own issues, their own flaws, and their own wants, is there a dilemma in that? Is there obstacles in that that's caused by that first obstacle, meaning something they have done themselves to propel the movie forward?
I think what this is trying to say is like cause and effect.
Yeah.
From the beginning, in this sequence 3, the first part of Act 2, you're in this new world, and now you're doing these new things, and now the effect... It's like the whiplash of what just happened in sequence 3 is now happening in sequence 4.
Yeah. Hey, let's talk about Maverick.
Oh, okay. Sure.
So the break into 2 is now I am going to Top Gun, right? I'm going to Top Gun, and I am going to fly this awesome mission because obviously they're going to choose me, Maverick, to do this impossible mission. Mm-hmm. And then the first obstacle is, no, actually, we don't want you to be the awesome pilot. We want you to train the awesome pilots. And so the sequence 4 is, okay, I've gone past my first obstacle, which is I've accepted that I'm going to be a teacher now, and that sucks. But the promise of the premise is leading up to the midpoint is now let me have fucking fun with these cadets. And It's Tom Cruise training everyone and everyone failing and no one being as good as Maverick. That's kind of what this sequence is to me.
I agree.
All right.
Okay, so we're after the midpoint. Sequence 5 they call the twists and turns. Sequence 5 usually contains the twists and turns of Act 2. This is when secrets are revealed, relationships are tested, tensions rise, obstacles get more challenging to overcome, and the protagonists are really put to the test. In this sequence, the protagonist typically rebels against whatever growth they've been confronted with, wanting instead for things to stay the same. I'm starting to get angry.
I love this one.
Okay.
I love this one because I love when characters are trying to stay the same as much as possible, and their world is poking at them and punching them in the face and saying, you can't stay the same. You have to grow. You have to learn. You have to change. Those are my favorite characters. I love this. And the reminder that it comes around here, like that's important because in my intro, I've established the fatal flaws of my character, and here's where it gets tested after like the fun of the premise, the fun of them going into a new world and facing new obstacles and going to Top Gun and the kind of wide eyes of that whole situation. And now Tom Cruise has to learn how to let go of his issues with Goose so that he can make a better pilot out of Rooster and be a better man. Like, it's all of that stuff. That's all the good character shit. And I love it.
And I guess I think it's important to say that these moments, I don't feel like they have to be multiple moments. I feel like this could happen in one moment, like somebody kind of pushing back of the change that they've already had. And it's like, I want to be the person that I was. When I read this, I don't know, I'm a little conflicted. That's all. I like the idea of wanting
what's the conflict?
Well, yeah. I like the idea of wanting to stay the same, but I feel like doing, an entire sequence, like an entire first part of Act 2B of pushing back doesn't make all the sense to me. Because I feel like at this point of your screenplay, you have many other obstacles that someone has to deal with.
Outside obstacles.
Outside obstacles. Yeah.
Yeah. But those plot obstacles, if you're writing a plot-driven movie, are still things that should confront your character.
That's true.
In ways that make them uncomfortable.
I'm coming around. The twist and turn for me is that I'm trying to fucking hold on to the past right now, and I'm refusing to grow with this sequence. So here I go. I'm going into sequence 6 now.
Get out of your status quo, man.
Oh my God.
Except sequence 6.
Yeah.
The culmination and the low point, where all of Act 2 culminates in sequence 6.
Dun, dun.
Things have steadily gotten more and more difficult for the protagonist, all leading to this culmination or this low point of Act 2. And at the end of this sequence 6, the protagonist finds themselves at a point of either culmination, the positive, or low point, negative, that directly leads them to the next sequence, which is the climax. I fucking hate this shit too, by the way. Positive, low point. There's so many in story structures. There's so many, like, if your protagonist fails at the end, then they need to succeed here. If your protagonist succeeds at the end, then they need to fail here. And I'm like, what the fuck does that mean? That's what formula is that? What?
Here's the thing. I just want to be very clear that we're not shitting on Screencraft.
Not Screencraft, just the 8 sequence structure.
Well,
I'm actually taken from other things.
This weirdly makes sense to me, this 8 sequence structure. It really does. I understand why this is broken up the way it is. But
do you understand this positive, negative thing? I think it confuses writers. Like, I don't know how to write to that.
I don't either.
What I do know, I love low points, so I'm not shitting on sequence 6 being a low point. That is where it should be. Your characters should have a low point where everything is taken from them. The things that they thought they knew about themselves are not true anymore, and I have to find a new way. That is, if you are writing a movie or a show that has a character who grows. I mean, you might not. You might have John Wick, who doesn't grow, and he's just awesome the whole time.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've never written something that had a high point. I don't
know what that looks like.
I don't either. I think for me, it's always like, okay, here's the low point. Like, shit has hit the fan. You've lost everybody. But those are just the type of characters I like to write. But so I've never really.
There are false wins. Like, there's that's definitely a possibility, right? Where your character thinks that, the end of Die Hard 2, right? They think they've defeated the terrorists, but really the terrorist has a plan C that you didn't even see coming. That's super fun. But I don't think that's the low point of your movie. That's just part of Act 2, leading to the low point.
I'm really impressed that you threw out Die Hard 2.
Yeah.
When there's Die Hard 1 and Die Hard 3, which I think we all agree on is like one of the best Die Hards. So it's just crazy to me that you just went to 2. But anyway, moving on. Sequence 7. This is it. This is the climax, the big moment, the massive fight scene, the come to Jesus moment where your protagonist must change or die. Everything is on the line. The stakes have never been higher. It all happens in sequence 7. And we, Tasha, the audience, learn whether or not the protagonist succeeds or fails. Mm-hmm. Yeah, to me, this happens after a low point. That's why I don't understand the positive, negative aspect of it. For me, it's always just, if someone has examples of the culmination that's a high point and then it switches over and then just please send it to us.
Maybe it is an example of where you think you defeat the terrorist at the low point, success, yay, we're all celebrating. And then the climax is the terrorist's next real big attack. And you're like, oh, fuck, I didn't kill the terrorists. I have to go after them now.
Yeah.
And so now my climax is recovering from the false wind and moving into this new climax versus, say, the low point is oh no, the terrorist has one-upped me and I have failed. And climax is, oh, I have a new idea of how to take down this terrorist. So it's just kind of twisting that a little bit. But again, I'm not going to figure that out by thinking, oh, I need a positive moment here because I need a fail at the end. That's not how I'm going to come to that story idea. I'm going to come to this story idea because I love the idea that Bruce Willis thinks he's won and he's just too cocky about it. And really, my really intelligent villain that I love having crafted as being so intelligent has thought of everything and has a new plan. Like, that's how I'm going to come to this idea. I'm not going to come to it because I'm cramming it into a structure, which is why I hate structures. There's me again trying to... I'm sorry. This is important to talk about still.
No, this is very, very important. I feel like what we're doing is working through our issues with it in real time while we're talking about this 8-sequence structure.
Yeah. Because here's the thing. One more thing.
Please. Oh, God.
I have a whole like document on my desktop of story structure that I've stolen from different books and websites, and it includes a lot of these 8-sequence structure examples, and many of them are 8-sequence structures, but they're all different. Like, we just read you sequence 7, what the climax is. Here's sequence 7 in this other story structure. The revelation allows our hero to see victory, and he rejoins the battle with new fervor, finally turning the tables on his antagonist, and arrives at apparent victory, and then the tables turn one more time.
Yeah.
That's very different.
But it's
okay. It's a whole different idea.
It's hard to comprehend. Like, that's the thing is, you're like, okay, the tables have turned. Oh, how do we turn the tables again? Like, that's difficult. I feel like just to read and without really fully knowing what your story is and without fully knowing who your characters are and who are the characters who are going to double cross another character and who has the potential to double cross another character. And that's just really, really hard to do on the surface.
Yeah, if you don't know what your characters are doing already in the story and how you want them to progress, just as a general 50,000-foot bird's eye view of it, you're not going to be able to write to this. It doesn't make sense. I'm going to read one more other story structures, beat 7, that again is really confusing and always would trip me up when I was coming up and starting to try to learn how to write structure. Okay. So this sequence says, sequence 7 is the unexpected circumstances from the previous sequences raise the stakes and they create a new angle. Subplots begin to get wrapped up if the main tension is result or the effects of the main tension being resolved are dealt with. I have a degree in English and I don't know what that means.
I was just going to say, I have no idea what you just said.
Subplots begin to get wrapped up.
Okay.
Yes, that's okay. But I can't write, again, I can't write to that. I just know I need to start wrapping up my B and C story here. But that's going to come intuitively. I can't shove that into this moment. So that's why I think my recommendation is write your screenplay first. Write what you love, write what you want it to be, then come back to these story structures and say, okay, well, my climax isn't quite working or it is a little slower than I really want it to be. Maybe I've forgotten to wrap up my subplots. Okay, like let me look at the subplot thread in my script and see if I can't get it to kind of wrap up around this section of the movie. They become helpful tips in that way.
Yeah.
So that's how Josh and I think would advocate you use these kind of 8-sequence structures that you can find on Screencraft.
Oh, God. Well, wait, we never read sequence 8.
Sequence 8 is the resolution.
Yeah.
It is the narrative epilogue. It's what happens to your characters after their success or failure during the climax, including a look at how they have been impacted by that success or failure. In this sequence, the journey we've been on since sequence 1 finally comes to an end, and you fade to black.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, this is like, it's like the Biff Tannen moment. It's like, he punches Biff Tannen at the end. Or like, you know what I'm saying? It's like the passive guy all of a sudden now can stand up to his boss who's been a dickhead. Or that's the resolution. That's just kind of to see how the characters have changed in the growth. But
Yeah.
I agree with everything you just said in the sense of write your screenplay, make sure there's things happening to your character, there's twists and turns, and then kind of go back and try to fit it into a structure if you want to in like a revision phase. I think that's probably the healthiest way to do this without beating your head wondering how to write with this structure.
Yeah. And if you do feel like you're someone who really needs structure to help write your script, it totally makes sense. I still do it all the time, especially if I just have a kernel of an idea and don't know how it's a movie. Like I just have a character that I love and maybe I have the ending. Well, I have no idea what the other beats are. So I will often pull up that Word doc I have on my desktop that's all these different story structures. And okay, which one makes the most sense for me and for this story? And I'll start kind of plugging in moments that I think work given my characters. And it just that's a way I brainstorm sometimes. So you can use it for that. But usually when I'm doing that, it's not, okay, subplot wraps up here. It's not positive and failure here because that's confusing to me. I don't understand that. It is, however, inciting incident at 15 pages, a break into act 2 at 25 pages, a midpoint at page 50, a low point at page 75, a climax, and a resolution. Those are the beats I do when I'm just brainstorming.
Yeah.
And that helps me see just the skeleton of this to help me continue to build out my story. And then, yes, I will go in to these weird subplot things and be like, oh, right, I totally forgot to wrap up the love story. I got to find a beat for that. And I actually have that problem in my current screenplay that I'm working on right now, where I've gotten the note that like this mentor relationship I have between my two main characters doesn't have a wrap-up moment. And I'm like, shit. If I'd only looked at that sequence 7 and the 8 sequence structure, I would have remembered to do that. So these are important, and they do actually have an effect on your screenplay, and people do notice when it's not there.
Yeah.
I'm just weary of advising people to follow these as your starting point.
Well, so it's really interesting, and I'm going to post this World's End thing that I was telling you about. It's broken up in an 8 sequence structure. I just looked at it. And
that's amazing.
What's crazy about it is I feel like it's a little more succinct. Like I'm looking at it and it makes sense to me. And I'm like, okay, I can see this. And sometimes breaking things up, at least for me, I find where you're like, okay, this is what the first part of Act 1 is. This is the parts of Act 2. It doesn't make the screenplay so daunting. It's almost like you can look at it and it's like, here are the pieces. This is what happens in this sequence, this sequence, this sequence, where sometimes screenplays can feel like a big web of just mystery. Yeah. And I feel like the more you can kind of wrap your head around it and it can be a little bit more of a linear thing in your brain, for me, it's helpful.
You know what I'm going to do? You have just inspired me. Yeah. And this episode has just inspired me. The script that I'm revising that I'm having some difficulty with in terms of seeing the full picture, I think I'm going to print out like the mini movies in the movie. Yeah. Like where each section, staple it separately and read it and be like, oh yeah, this has no individual arc here.
Yeah.
And break it up that way. I think that's super cool. And I will keep you posted on if that works. But that's a great way to use this structure idea.
Plot twist. You and I both are advocates for the 8-part story structure. It makes sense to me now. All of a sudden, we've talked this through. I'm like, okay. You can break it up.
So we had a failure earlier. It was a negative, and now it's a positive.
It is. It's so true. I can see, and I feel like I'm going to do it. And I actually did this with something that I'm outlining now, where I was breaking down my Act 1. This was before reading this, by the way. But I was like, okay, the first part of Act 1 is this. The second part of Act 1 is this. The first part and I was going through everything, and it was kind of this structure, but just in like my own brain.
Yeah.
You know what would be interesting? The last thing I'll say is we should one day write out what our structure looks like the Tasha theory and the Josh theory. And so if someone were to try to write a screenplay, it would be like, this is how Tasha does it. This is how Josh does
it. The Act 2 way of doing it. Yeah. I'm sure ours are different too. Let's do it. We'll create our own 8 sequence structure.
Mine's like, part 1, the fuck happens here? Question mark. Part 2, Payoff.
Yeah, all of Act 2, all those sequences are just blank for me.
Yeah.
No idea.
Anyway, so that's it. That's structure. We're constantly working through it. Like it or not, there's structure in screenplays, and I don't know where we fall in that.
There is. You know, when you write in TV, structure becomes super important.
Yeah.
Because you can't get away with lazy scripts. You can't get away with it because people will literally stop watching and they will stop making your show. You know? So we do have to look at them definitely in acts. We definitely, like currently right now, it's like, well, what is our act out? And even though we're not going to have commercials in the thing we're making because it's streaming, they're still like, well, what is the hook that's going to get someone intrigued to move on to the next sequence of your episode?
Yeah.
And those are important questions to continually ask.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate saying it too, because there's a sense of like, well, you're selling out. I guess there's a, right?
I don't care. I'm a sellout.
The reality is you need your movie to be engaging.
You
need your show to be engaging, because it's a multi-billion-dollar industry that requires people to come see your movie and show and pay for it. So giving them a boring movie or show just doesn't work in this model. So
it's true. I mean, we live in an attention-driven world, and you have to be able to hold someone's attention. And the way that you do that is by ratcheting things up and having twists and having turns. And that falls within a structure. Structure makes people feel comfortable, whether you know it or not. So we have to adhere to this. And in TV, I can only imagine, because you're working within a specific time frame, you know, and you're like, okay, we have to hit this at this beat, this and this mark, this and this mark. So
yeah. And for like procedurals, it's very literally, we have to hit them at this minute. We have to hit them at this minute. And they're super successful. And I'm never going to write a network show like that, but I am paying attention to how do I make this show as interesting as possible? Because as an audience member, I always love the moments where I'm like, holy shit, did they just do that?
Of course.
Oh, I need to get back to that storyline. I need to keep watching. That's super fun. It makes watching TV and movies fun. So that's what we're advocating. Just making your stories more fun.
Well, I'm just going to leave on this note. This is why like pop songs are so timeless and popular at all times. It's a fucking, like, you put it into a factory and it comes out, it's like it opens a certain way, and then like second 30 it starts going into, like, it starts elevating, and then it dips down, it goes up, dips down. Like, we hear the same song over and over and over again, but it's awesome every single time.
Right.
And that's because we're just comfortable hearing it, and we're going to rock out to it because that's what we love. Structure, baby. I'm all in on structure now.
Okay, my last thing is when I became a true believer in structure was when I watched Jane Eyre, and I've told this story before. When I watched Jane Eyre, the new one, the Cary Fukunaga one, and it was like it's literally to the page, to the minute of where these turning points are that we've talked about. So I would challenge you to watch your favorite movie. And you're like, fuck you, Tasha, like structure. I'm not going to listen to structure. Great. Watch your favorite movie and see if they hit these beats. And I bet you they do in really surprising ways. And you're like, oh, they also paid attention to structure. That's really surprising, because if it's done well, you don't notice it's there.
I think the lesson from this podcast is that you and I know that we need structure, but deep down inside, we fight against it. But like, our true selves
not even
are
deep down inside, on the surface.
Yeah, on the surface, we're fighting against it, but we know. And if we were in a room with someone, it'd be like, there's no structure to this. There needs to be some kind of structure to your script if it wasn't there. So
it's true.
That's
push
just
and pull.
It's just growth, Tasha. We've grown up.
An anxiety-inducing podcast. I feel like I've just run a mile. Whew.
Yeah, feel great.
All right, quote of the day. A screenplay is a living thing, and each piece, even though separate and complete, is a part of the whole. Structure, remember, is the relationship between the parts and the whole. Sid Fields.
Oh, boy.
Please remember to rate and subscribe. Follow us at Act 2 Writers for more awesome writing stuff. You can follow me, Tasha, at Story Thursday on Instagram, or on Twitter at Tasha 3.0.
I'm Joshua Hallman on Twitter, Josh Hallman on Instagram.
And as always, the Act 2 podcast is a production of Act 2, a network and support group for the everyday working screenwriter. This episode was edited by Paul Lundquist.